High in Idaho's frozen Sawtooth Mountains, Grant Holloway arrived to shut down an old radio station for the final time. Instead, he found Briar, a German shepherd guarding a weakened puppy that was not even her own. Before Grant could disconnect the equipment, the silent receiver suddenly began transmitting an SOS from a distant peak. An injured technician was trapped above the valley, while a maintenance crew unknowingly traveled toward a dangerous communication dead zone. With a winter storm closing in, Grant had to balance one fading power supply, several lives, and a responsibility he could no longer carry alone. But Briar would teach him that loyalty cannot be owned, and trust begins when someone is free to leave but chooses to stay. Tell us where you're watching from, or share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to help our channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating meaningful stories. The first snow of the season had fallen cleanly over the Sawtooth Range. It lay across the pine branches in soft white shelves and filled the shallow spaces between rocks without yet burying the service road. Above the ridgeline, the sky was an impossible blue, bright enough to make the slopes seem almost warm from a distance. Only the fine powder lifting behind Grant Holloway's snowmobile revealed how sharp the morning truly was. Grant leaned slightly into the turns, his broad frame steady beneath an olive winter parka. A green camouflage shirt showed at the open collar, and his dark cargo trousers disappeared into weathered brown field boots secured against the snow. A gray-blue scarf, marked by a single line of burnt orange thread, was tucked beneath his jacket. At 59, Grant still moved with the economy of someone who had spent most of his life avoiding wasted effort. He stood 6 feet tall, with wide shoulders and a body kept strong by habit rather than vanity. His dark brown hair had gone silver at the temples, and a heavy salt and pepper stubble followed the long shape of his jaw. The bridge of his nose bent slightly to one side, barely noticeable until the light struck his face directly. His eyes were pale gray and deeply set. People often mistook their stillness for calm. Grant knew better. Stillness was sometimes only discipline with nowhere else to go. Cedar Relay 7 appeared beyond the next rise, a squat metal structure anchored to the mountainside. Its antenna mast cut a narrow black line across the blue sky. For 42 years, the station had passed weather warnings, maintenance calls, road closures, and emergency messages through the northern valleys. By spring, it would be gone. Grant eased the snowmobile beside the equipment shed and switched off the engine. The silence returned so quickly that it felt deliberate. He remained seated for a moment, gloved hands resting on the handlebars. This was supposed to be simple. Back up the archived transmission logs. Remove the analog transmitter. Disconnect the power supply. Lock the station for the demolition crew scheduled after the winter thaw. 4 tasks. He had written them the night before in his waxed canvas notebook, although he knew the procedure well enough to complete it without looking. Grant removed the notebook from his parka pocket and checked the list anyway. It was easier to trust ink than memory when a task mattered. It was also easier to think about equipment than the fact that this was his final assignment before retirement. The county had approved the closure in July. The new digital network, supported by microwave towers, internet routing, and repeaters positioned along the higher peaks, had completed its test period without a major failure. Cedar Relay was old, expensive to maintain, and increasingly difficult to repair. Grant had agreed with the recommendation. A system did not deserve to remain active merely because people had grown sentimental about it. He had repeated that argument often enough that it had begun to sound less like a technical conclusion and more like something he was trying to prove to himself. Grant stepped from the snowmobile and looked toward the station door. Edwin Sutter's utility sled was nowhere in sight. The retired weather technician was supposed to meet him at 8:30 with the keys, the maintenance records, and several decades of handwritten notes that no one had yet transferred into the county archive. Edwin was 10 minutes late. That was unusual. He was unpredictable in conversation, but exact about time. Grant had once watched him interrupt a county budget meeting because a battery inspection was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Grant checked his watch, then approached the entrance. A dented blue thermos sat on the snow beside the door. The lid was closed. A thin crescent of frost had formed along the metal handle. Grant touched the side with 2 fingers. There was no warmth left in it. He opened the outer door and entered the narrow control room. The station smelled of cold metal, dust, old insulation, and the faint electrical warmth of machinery that had been operating longer than some of the people assigned to replace it. A folding chair stood pulled away from the desk. A pencil lay beside the maintenance ledger. Someone had opened the cabinet beneath the counter, revealing 2 cans of dog food and a shallow metal bowl. Grant stopped. Edwin had never owned a dog, at least not in the 12 years Grant had known him. A sheet of paper had been placed beneath the station keys. The message was written in Edwin's slanted block lettering. Grant, I went up to Summit Echo to check the transfer relay. The little dog is weak. Take him down to the valley. I'll be back before noon. E.S. Grant read it twice. Then he heard a low scrape behind him. He turned. A German shepherd stood in front of the inner equipment room door. She was large but lean, her coat a deep black across the head, back, and tail, while her cheeks, chest, and legs carried a dark honey gold color. The black saddle along her body was uneven, falling lower over the right side like a cloak that had slipped from one shoulder. Her muzzle had begun to gray. One ear stood straight, while the tip of the left had a small triangular notch that gave it a permanent outward tilt. She did not bark. She did not bare her teeth. She simply moved 1 step sideways as Grant shifted his weight, placing herself more completely between him and the door. "Easy," Grant said. The dog watched his hands. Grant lowered them away from his jacket. The dog's amber eyes moved briefly to his face, then returned to his gloves. He took 1 careful step toward the door. She matched it. Not toward him, across him. A barrier without aggression. Grant had worked beside trained dogs before, though never as a handler. He knew the difference between an animal preparing to attack and one preserving distance. This dog did not want to drive him from the station. She wanted him to understand that something behind the door mattered. Grant glanced at the latch. "Edwin put you in charge?" The dog did not react to the name, but her ears shifted when the wind rattled a loose panel outside. Grant stepped back. The German shepherd remained where she was. He could have used food to move her. He could have taken a catch pole from the emergency cabinet or called animal control. Both choices would take time, and neither explained why Edwin had left a sick puppy in a relay station before going farther up the mountain alone. Grant moved through the control room toward the narrow maintenance passage along the sidewall. An exterior access panel opened into the equipment room from the rear. The dog followed him to the window, but did not leave her position. Outside, the sunlight had changed. A thin veil of cloud was beginning to gather above the western peaks, so faint that most people would not have noticed it. Grant noticed. He followed the side of the building, brushed snow from the maintenance latch, and unlocked it with the smaller station key. When the panel opened, warm air touched his face. A low floor heater was still running inside. Between a storage cabinet and the base of the transmitter rack sat an insulated equipment crate. Someone had lined it with an old wool sweater and folded towels. Inside lay a German shepherd puppy. The puppy was perhaps 7 weeks old, black and brown, with paws too large for the rest of his narrow body. One ear had begun to rise, while the other remained folded. A cream-colored patch shaped like a drop of water marked the fur beneath his throat. A strip of orange reflective fabric had been tied loosely around his neck, the kind road crews used on their winter gear. Grant knelt. The puppy opened amber-brown eyes but did not lift his head. His breathing was steady, though too quiet, and the tips of his ears felt cold beneath Grant's glove. "All right," Grant murmured. "I see you." He removed one glove and placed 2 fingers against the puppy's side. The small body responded with a faint tremor. The German shepherd appeared through the interior doorway. For the first time, Grant saw uncertainty disturb her stillness. She entered slowly, lowered her nose to the puppy, and inspected his face, ears, and chest. The puppy stirred and pressed weakly toward her muzzle. Grant expected the older dog to block him again when he reached into the crate. She did not. Instead, she moved back half a step. Not permission exactly, but space. That small decision unsettled Grant more than aggression would have. He slid one hand beneath the puppy's chest and the other beneath his hindquarters, lifting him with the sweater still wrapped around his body. The puppy weighed almost nothing. The older dog watched closely. Grant could feel her attention on every movement. "You know he can't stay here." Her ears shifted. Grant carried the puppy into the control room and placed him inside an insulated transport bag from his snowmobile kit. He left the top open and tucked the sweater around him so the puppy could breathe freely. The German Shepherd approached and smelled Grant's bare hand. Her nose was cold against his knuckles. For one suspended second, Grant thought she might allow him to touch her. Then her head turned sharply toward the northern wall, toward Summit Echo. Grant followed her gaze even though the metal wall revealed nothing beyond it. The dog knew where Edwin had gone. Perhaps she knew only the direction. Perhaps she had followed him before. Grant refused to assign more intelligence to the gesture than it deserved, but he could not dismiss it either. He pulled on his glove and returned to the main console. The backup procedure still had to begin before he transported the puppy. If he left the station powered without recording its final logs, another technician would have to make the climb later. Grant connected the storage drive and watched the archive transfer begin. 42 years of transmissions reduced to a progress bar moving across a screen. 9%. 14. 21. Outside, the German Shepherd paced from the station door to the edge of the service road and back again. Grant found himself looking at her each time she passed the window. The puppy made a soft sound from the transport bag. The older dog stopped immediately. She pressed her nose against the glass. Grant looked from the puppy to the dog, then to Edwin's note on the desk. The handwriting no longer felt casual. It felt unfinished. At 38%, the analog receiver crackled. Grant turned toward it. Static filled the control room, then disappeared. 3 short tones sounded through the speaker. A pause. 3 long tones. Another pause. 3 short tones. Grant did not move. The sequence repeated. His hand closed around the edge of the desk. SOS. The display identified the source as Summit Echo. Edwin. Grant reached for the radio microphone and switched frequencies. Summit Echo, this is Cedar Relay 7. Edwin, do you copy? Only static answered. He tried again. Summit Echo, Cedar Relay, acknowledge if you can hear me. 3 short tones, 3 long, 3 short. The German Shepherd had returned to the equipment room door. Her body faced Grant, but her head remained turned north. Grant lifted the county emergency handset. Teresa Quinn answered on the second ring. Her voice was controlled and clear, the voice of someone accustomed to hearing bad information without allowing it to become confusion. Emergency management. Teresa, this is Holloway at Cedar Relay 7. I have an active Morse distress signal from Summit Echo. Edwin Sutter is unaccounted for. The pause lasted less than a second. Condition of the station? Cedar is operational. Voice contact with Summit is unavailable. Signal is repeating. Are you alone? With 2 dogs, 1 puppy needs veterinary attention. Teresa did not waste time asking how that had happened. I'm activating ground response. Air support is unavailable. Winds are already building above 9,000 feet. Grant looked through the window at the western clouds. They were thicker now. I can go up with the team, he said. Another short pause. You are the communications specialist assigned to the site, Teresa replied. But this is your final field day. You are not obligated to join the approach team if another technician can be brought in. Grant stared at the progress bar. 63%. The dog outside stood motionless in the snow. For months, Grant had imagined the end of his career as a clean line. One final station, one locked door, one set of keys returned to the county. No ceremony, no speeches, no reason to look back. Now a signal traveled down the mountain through equipment he had come to silence. Grant touched the orange cord wrapped around his notebook. "I know," he said. Teresa waited. Grant could hand the station over. He could deliver the puppy to the valley, brief the rescue team, and allow someone else to climb towards Summit Echo. It would not be cowardice, it would be procedure. For the first time in years, he could let another person carry the next part. The receiver sounded again. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Grant looked at the old transmitter, at Edwin's note, and finally at the German Shepherd. She was not watching him now. She was watching the mountain. "Prepare a ground team," Grant said. "I'll bring Cedar's equipment map and meet them at Winter Lantern." Teresa's answer was immediate. "Understood. Do not proceed beyond the lodge without the team lead." "I won't." Grant ended the call. The backup reached 100%. He removed the drive but left the transmitter connected. The shutdown order no longer applied while an active emergency signal depended upon the station. Grant locked the equipment cabinets, packed Edwin's note and maintenance ledger, then lifted the transport bag containing the puppy. Outside, the older dog approached the snowmobile. Grant placed the bag securely in the insulated rear compartment, leaving the vent open. The puppy shifted beneath the sweater. The German Shepherd rose on her front paws and smelled the edge of the compartment. Her amber eyes found the puppy through the opening. "He's going somewhere warm," Grant said. The dog looked at him briefly. Grant started the engine. He drove slowly at first. The German Shepherd ran behind the snowmobile, her black and gold body cutting across the bright snow. She followed down the first slope, then the second, never drawing close enough to touch the machine. At the bend where Cedar Relay disappeared behind the pines, Grant looked back. The dog had stopped. She stood alone on the white hillside, chest rising beneath her winter coat, the notch in her left ear visible against the sky. For a few seconds, she watched the transport compartment carrying the puppy. Then she turned away. Not toward the station, toward the higher road leading to Summit Echo. Grant slowed but did not stop. The puppy needed warmth. The rescue team needed information. Edwin's signal continued to pulse through the radio mounted near the handlebars. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Grant guided the snowmobile toward the valley, while the German Shepherd climbed back toward the mountain. Each of them carrying one half of a responsibility neither had chosen to abandon. Winter Lantern stood at the lower edge of the valley, where the service road widened before meeting the county highway. The lodge had once served crews maintaining the weather stations above the tree line. Over the years, it had become part guest house, part supply depot, and part unofficial radio room for people who trusted Claudia Reese more than they trusted a cellular signal. Grant brought the snowmobile beneath the covered side entrance and shut off the engine. Before he could remove the transport bag, the door opened. Claudia stepped outside without a coat, apparently too impatient to put one on. She was a sturdy woman of 63, with silver hair cut in a neat bob and square glasses the color of dark wine. A forest green sweater showed beneath a brown quilted vest. In one hand, she held a white enamel mug with a blue rim, in the other, a handheld radio. "You said one puppy," she said. "One puppy." "And the other dog?" "Went back uphill." Claudia looked past him toward the road. "Of course she did." Grant lifted the bag carefully. The puppy stirred beneath Edwin's old sweater but did not open his eyes. Claudia's expression changed. The practical sharpness remained, but something warmer moved behind it. "Holly's already in the dining room," she said. "I turned the heat up and cleared the table." Grant carried the puppy inside. Winter Lantern smelled of coffee, cedar smoke, and bread warming somewhere beyond the kitchen. The main room had timber walls darkened by age, a stone fireplace, and tall windows facing the white slope behind the lodge. A narrow doorway beside the front desk led into the radio room, where several receivers and handwritten frequency charts occupied more space than the guest register. Dr. Holly Ames had arranged towels and medical supplies across the long dining table. She wore sage green scrubs over a gray thermal shirt, with waterproof brown boots and a charcoal vest. Her black hair, threaded lightly with silver, was tied in a low knot. Thin tortoiseshell glasses rested near the end of her nose as she checked the digital thermometer in her hand. Grant set down the bag. Holly did not reach in immediately. She crouched, removed her gloves, and warmed her hands around Claudia's mug until Claudia noticed. "That was mine," Claudia said. "You were holding it, not drinking it." "I was thinking about drinking it." Holly handed the mug back and slowly folded the top of the bag away. The puppy blinked at the room. "He's responsive," Holly said. "That's good." She placed one hand lightly against his side and waited for his breathing to settle before examining him. Every movement was quiet and deliberate. Grant had seen medics work that way with frightened people, making the next touch predictable before it arrived. The puppy's right ear made a weak effort to rise. The left remained folded against his head. "Male," Holly said. "Maybe 7 weeks, underweight, mildly dehydrated, chilled, but I'm not seeing anything that suggests immediate organ trouble." Grant released a breath he had not noticed holding. Holly glanced at him over her glasses. "That does not mean he's ready for a steak and a snowball fight." "I wasn't planning either." "You look like a man who solves problems by adding fuel." Claudia carried the puppy's sweater toward the fireplace. "She's known you 4 minutes." 3, Grant said. Holly wrapped the puppy in a dry towel and placed a warmed water pouch beside him, leaving enough space for him to move away from the heat. "Small amounts of fluid," she explained. "Then a little food when his temperature comes up. Fast warming can stress him. We go slowly." Grant looked toward the side windows. The slope beyond the lodge was empty. No black and gold shape moved between the trees. "She stayed with him at the station," he said, "but she let me carry him." "The adult shepherd?" Grant nodded. "Female, around 8, maybe older." "Was the puppy nursing?" "I didn't see it." Holly studied the small body beneath the towel. She gently examined his belly and the fur around his neck, then checked the orange reflective strip Edwin had tied there. If the female were nursing a 7-week-old litter, there would usually be signs: milk production, changes in the underside. Protective behavior can tell us many things, but it doesn't prove blood relation. Grant thought of the older dog stepping back from the crate. "Then she may not be his mother." "She may not be," Holly said. "That doesn't make what she's doing less important." Claudia had moved into the radio room. A moment later, Grant heard the familiar scrape of a logbook opening. He followed her. The room was compact, warmed by equipment and a small wall heater. Claudia sat beneath a corkboard crowded with weather notices, county maps, and handwritten call signs. Her wine-colored glasses had shifted lower on her nose. She wrote transmission times in red ink, each entry aligned with almost severe precision. "Edwin checked in yesterday at 4:14, she said. "Listen." She ran a finger down the log. "Reported intermittent failure on Summit Echo's analog transfer relay. Said he had authorization for one final inspection and would return to Cedar Relay before your arrival." "No contact after that?" "One routine carrier signal at 7:20 this morning. No voice. Then the SOS began at 9:17. Grant checked his watch. The distress signal had started only minutes before he reached the station. Claudia tapped the page. "So nobody ignored him for days. Whatever happened, it happened recently enough that he was still able to operate the manual key this morning." That mattered. Not because it made Edwin safe, but because it narrowed the uncertainty. Grant looked toward the receivers. One speaker carried a low wash of static from Cedar Relay's frequency. The distress sequence had stopped repeating continuously, likely to conserve power, but the silence did not feel empty. It felt occupied. From the dining room came a faint, rough whimper, The puppy had woken. Grant returned to find him lifting his head toward the radio room. The sound came again, not a cry of pain, but a searching noise, thin and uncertain. Holly steadied the towel around him. "Easy, little man." The puppy ignored her voice and continued staring toward the static. Grant took Edwin's maintenance ledger from his field bag and set it on the table. The pages smelled faintly of machine oil and pencil shavings. He began with the latest entries. Most were technical: voltage fluctuations, ice accumulation, replacement dates, battery readings. Then, in the margin beside a routine inspection 4 months earlier, Edwin had written, "Large female shepherd near cedar, no collar, won't approach while door is shut." 2 weeks later, dog returned, left food outside. She waited until I stepped away. The next entries became shorter. Saw her near Summit Road, sleeping under East Platform during wind. No sign she belongs to anyone. 10 days before, female arrived with young pup, not hers unless she has discovered a new way to hide motherhood from biology. Pup weak, she lets him eat first. Grant read the sentence again. She lets him eat first. Holly leaned over the ledger but did not touch it. "That sounds like Edwin," she said. "You know him?" "Everyone in 3 counties knows Edwin. Half of them owe him a working furnace or a weather warning." Claudia called from the radio room. "The other half owe him an apology." Grant closed the ledger. The thought followed him anyway. The adult shepherd had not remained beside the puppy because instinct required it. She had chosen him, fed after him, slept near him, and positioned herself between him and danger. Grant had spent most of his life believing duty was strongest when formalized: rank, procedure, assignment, oath. The dog had none of those things. Still, she had returned uphill. The front door opened. A gust of cold air moved through the lodge, followed by Lena Broom. She carried winter with her in the form of snow dusting her forest green rescue jacket and the shoulders of an olive pack. 3 narrow strips of white tape marked the right strap. Her reddish-brown hair, streaked with silver, had been cut short at the nape to fit beneath a helmet. She was lean, compact, and moved with the balance of someone accustomed to uneven ground. Lena removed one glove and placed a folded terrain map on the table. "You're Holloway." "Grant." "I know." Her green-gray eyes moved briefly to the puppy, softened for half a second, then returned to Grant. "I'm Lena Broom, Mountain Rescue and Avalanche Assessment. Teresa assigned me as approach lead." Grant looked at the clock. "We should leave." "We should leave when I know the route won't place the rescue team on a loaded slope." "Edwin has been up there since yesterday, and he will not benefit from us joining him as additional patients." Her tone was calm, not confrontational. That made it harder to dismiss. Grant opened the map. The service road to Summit Echo is maintained through the north switchback. Was maintained. Wind changed at dawn. The upper bowl is collecting snow faster than forecast. It was clear when I came through Cedar. Cedar is nearly 2,000 feet lower. Grant pressed a finger against the map. Every minute we wait, every minute we assess gives us a better chance of reaching him. Lena removed a small analog altimeter from her jacket and set it beside the map. Ground rescue is not combat. The mountain does not respond to urgency. It responds to weight, wind, temperature, and bad decisions. Grant felt Claudia watching from the doorway. He disliked audiences during disagreement. "What do you need?" he asked. "Latest wind readings from Cedar, Summit's last functioning sensor report, Edwin's planned route, 10 minutes to compare the snowpack bulletin with the local data." 10. If the numbers disagree, more. Grant's jaw tightened. Lena met his eyes directly. "A man moving fast without terrain information can turn one person waiting for help into 3. The sentence was not dramatic. She said it as though stating the boiling point of water. Grant stepped back from the map. "Get your data." "Already started." Lena walked into the radio room and began speaking with Claudia in concise technical phrases. Grant remained beside the table. The puppy had accepted a few drops of electrolyte solution from Holly. His eyes were brighter now, though his body still rested heavily in the towel. "What do you call him?" Holly asked. "I don't. He needs something for the chart." Grant looked at the reflective strip around the puppy's neck. The orange material caught the fireplace light like a small signal lamp. "Micah," Claudia called from the radio room. Grant turned. She pointed to the ledger without leaving her chair. "Edwin wrote it 3 days ago, said the pale mark under the pup's throat reminded him of a piece of mica catching sunlight." Holly smiled slightly. "Mica it is." The puppy blinked at the sound, then lowered his chin onto Grant's glove, which rested near the towel. Grant did not move his hand away. Outside, something crossed the far end of the slope. At first, he thought it was wind pushing snow from a low branch. Then, the black and gold shepherd emerged between the trees. Briar stopped beyond the lodge fence. Her coat was dusted with fresh powder, and her breathing moved visibly through her ribs. She had traveled down from the mountain again, but she did not approach the building. Micah lifted his head. A small sound escaped him. Briar's posture changed at once. The tension along her back eased. Her tail lowered from rigid alertness to a natural line behind her. Still, she would not enter the yard. Holly dimmed the nearest lamp so the glass reflected less of the room. Claudia opened the interior curtain but left the outer door closed. Briar watched Micah through the window. Only after the puppy settled did Grant notice the object held gently between her teeth. A weathered leather glove. Briar took 2 steps closer to the fence, lowered her head, and released it onto the snow. Then she backed away. Grant went outside alone. He did not walk directly toward the dog. Instead, he angled toward the glove, keeping his body turned partly aside. Briar remained beyond the fence. Grant picked up the glove. The leather was stiff with cold, the thumb darkened by old grease. A faded red pencil mark crossed the cuff. Edwin's. Grant had seen the man wear the same pair whenever he worked on exposed antenna housings. The glove could have fallen anywhere along the summit route. Briar had likely carried it because it held Edwin's scent, not because she understood its meaning to Grant. The difference mattered. Grant looked up. Briar had shifted her attention from him to Micah's window. The puppy pressed his nose weakly against the glass. For several seconds, the older dog held still. Then she turned toward the mountain. "Briar," Holly said softly from the doorway, trying the name from Edwin's ledger. One ear moved. The dog did not look back. She started up the service road, paused once at the first bend, and waited. Not for ownership, not for praise, only long enough to see whether the people below understood that her work was not finished. Lena came outside carrying her helmet. "We have a viable window," she said. 90 minutes before the upper wind becomes unacceptable. 2 rescuers will stage at Cedar Relay. Teresa has medical transport waiting here." Grant tightened his grip on Edwin's glove. "And the route?" "We assess it as we go. No shortcuts without approval." Grant looked toward Briar. The dog stood at the bend, her black saddle sharp against the white hillside. "She'll probably move ahead of us." "She can suggest a direction," Lena said. "She does not make the safety decision." Grant nodded. For once, the limitation did not feel like resistance. It felt like structure. He returned Edwin's glove to the table beside Micah, where the puppy immediately leaned toward its scent. Briar waited until Grant and Lena began moving their equipment toward the door. Then she disappeared around the bend, heading back toward the mountain and the other living creature she had refused to leave alone. Grant finally understood the shape of her loyalty. Briar was not searching for a master. She was traveling between 2 lives, carrying whatever comfort she could from one to the other. The road above Winter Lantern narrowed quickly. Within 20 minutes, the lodge had disappeared behind the folds of the valley, leaving only the low engine note of the rescue snowmobile and the steady scrape of Lena Broom's skis against packed snow. Grant drove while Lena traveled beside him on the wider sections, using collapsible poles to test the surface whenever the road crossed an exposed slope. Briar moved ahead at an easy run, black and gold against the white ground, never vanishing for more than a minute. At each fork she stopped. Sometimes she faced them. Sometimes she stood sideways, nose lifted toward the wind. She did not bark or circle impatiently. She simply waited until Grant and Lena reached the same point. Grant kept Edwin's glove tucked inside his jacket. The leather had softened slightly from his body heat, but the old smell of oil and cold metal remained. Briar glanced toward it once when Grant adjusted his zipper. Then she turned uphill again. "She recognizes the scent," Lena said. "She carried it 6 miles. That doesn't mean she brought it as a message." "I know." Lena looked at him. Grant kept his eyes on the road. "I said I know." They had left the snowmobile trailer and the 2-person reserve team at Cedar Relay. From there, Grant and Lena continued with a lighter rescue sled, medical equipment, radio batteries, and enough supplies to stabilize Edwin before moving him. Teresa had approved the approach under strict conditions: maintain scheduled radio checks, turn back if the upper wind crossed the agreed limit, and do not enter any slope Lena considered unstable. Grant had accepted the rules without argument. Accepting them and liking them were different matters. At the first major split in the service road, Briar took the eastern branch. Grant slowed. The official maintenance map showed Summit Echo accessible through the northern switchback, a shorter route that climbed directly across the open shoulder of the mountain. "The north road saves 30 minutes, he said. Lena planted a pole and studied the slope above it. Her forest green jacket blended into the shadow of the pines, while the 3 white tape strips on her pack stood out sharply. "It also crosses the bowl. The last report showed moderate risk." "The last report was issued before the wind shifted." Grant looked up. Snow streamed from the crest in long, pale ribbons. "The surface is holding." "The surface isn't the part I'm worried about." Lena stepped off the packed road and dug a small pit near the edge of the slope. She used a compact shovel to expose the layers beneath the fresh snow. Grant checked the time. Briar waited 20 yards ahead on the eastern branch. Lena brushed snow from one gloved hand and pressed against a thin, hard layer beneath the newer accumulation. "Old melt-freeze crust," she said. "Fresh wind load above it. The angle isn't severe. It becomes severe farther across. We don't have to cross the center. That is what people say before they discover the center moved." Grant breathed through his nose. Lena stood and replaced the shovel in her pack. "We take the eastern route. It adds distance. It removes the loaded slope. Edwin has already been up there overnight, and he needs us to arrive standing." Grant's eyes narrowed. Lena did not raise her voice. "The kind of confidence that helped you in another life can become a liability here. This mountain does not care what you used to do." For a moment, the only sound was wind moving through the high branches. Grant could have told her she knew nothing about his old life. He could have explained that urgency was not recklessness, that waiting had consequences too. Instead, he looked toward Briar. The dog had chosen the eastern branch before either of them opened the map, not because she understood snow layers, because she remembered a road. Lena's assessment gave that memory meaning. Grant turned the snowmobile. "Eastern route." Briar started moving again. The road climbed through a narrow corridor of fir and lodgepole pine. Sunlight flashed between trunks, bright enough to make Grant's eyes ache when it struck untouched snow. Farther west, the sky had begun to dull, blue fading beneath a gray shelf of cloud. They stopped twice to check wind speed. At the second stop, Grant called Winter Lantern. "Claudia, approach team. We're above Cedar on the eastern service road. Conditions stable so far." Static answered, then Claudia's voice. "Copy. Digital repeater on West Needle dropped 9 minutes ago. Microwave link is still intermittent." Any contact with the North Maintenance crew? Not through the digital network. County Dispatch is trying the Southern Relay. Lena leaned close enough to hear. Summit analog? Carrier signal only, Claudia said. No voice. Grant looked uphill. How long until the maintenance crew enters the pass? Scheduled departure was 40 minutes ago. We haven't confirmed whether they left. Grant's grip tightened around the microphone. Keep trying. I have been, Grant. Claudia's tone was not offended. It was a reminder. He released the transmit button. Briar had returned to them. She stood near the rescue sled, nose working over the canvas cover. Then she looked at Grant, moved to the road ahead, and continued uphill. Lena watched her go. She checks that we're still together. She checks Edwin's glove. Could be both. Grant restarted the engine. The higher they climbed, the more the landscape seemed to lose depth. Snow covered the smaller features until distance became difficult to judge. A low ridge could be 20 yards away or 200. The road itself appeared only where wind had carved a shallow depression between the trees. Briar slowed near an abandoned sensor post. The metal pole leaned slightly, its cups frozen in place. Beneath it, the snow carried several overlapping tracks, Briar's, the narrow runners of a utility sled, and the deeper impressions of a man's winter boots. Lena crouched. These are from yesterday, she said. Grant pointed toward the sled marks. Edwin came through here. The tracks continued uphill. Briar lowered her nose to one boot print, then moved on. Grant felt the strange pull of following a person through the evidence of ordinary movement, a heel placed too deeply on a turn, a sled runner cutting close to a tree. One brief stop where Edwin had stepped aside, perhaps to check the sensor, perhaps to catch his breath. There was nothing dramatic in those marks. That made them more intimate. They were not signs left by a missing man for rescuers. They were simply the last record of someone believing he would come back the same way. Near the final ridge, the service road split again. Briar chose left. Grant checked the maintenance map. Summit Echo is right. Lena examined the slope. The official access is right. What's left? Old battery route. It ends below the station platform. Briar stood on the left branch, looking back. Grant studied the dog. Snow clung to the fur beneath her chest. Her breathing was faster now, but she showed no sign of confusion. She may have used it to move between Cedar and Summit, he said. Maybe, but the station is still on the other side of that ridge. Grant pulled the directional receiver from his pack and extended the antenna. The signal strengthened when he turned toward the right-hand road. Edwin's transmitter is right. Lena checked the left route and shook her head. Too narrow for the rescue sled near the top. Grant looked at Briar. We go right. The dog remained still. Grant started the snowmobile. Only when the engine moved did Briar leave the left branch and follow them. The choice stayed with Grant. That mattered too. A dog's memory could offer a possibility. It could not replace judgment. They reached Summit Echo shortly before 4. The station sat above the tree line, anchored to a shelf of rock beneath a lattice tower coated in white ice. Its outer railing was half buried, and one section of the graded stairway had disappeared beneath wind-packed snow. An empty utility sled rested crooked below the platform. Grant stopped the snowmobile. The emergency locator and Edwin's phone were visible inside the sled's open storage box, protected beneath a clear plastic cover. There, Grant said. Lena moved first, testing the ground around the platform before allowing Grant closer. The lower stairway had a glazed surface beneath the snow. One of the handrails was bent inward, not broken, but struck hard enough to deform. Briar passed them and climbed the shallow side ramp leading to the equipment room door. She scratched once. Then she waited. Grant unlocked the door. Warmth did not meet them. The air inside was only slightly less cold than outdoors, carrying the dry smell of electrical components and old dust. "Edwin?" Grant called. A voice answered from behind the central console. "If you're here to disconnect my transmitter, your timing is poor." Grant rounded the equipment rack. Edwin Sutter sat on the floor with his back against a cabinet. His right leg was extended beneath a folded maintenance jacket, the knee supported by pieces of foam and a strip of webbing. His weathered face looked pale beneath a thick silver mustache, and his blue-gray wool cap sat crooked above hair that had gone almost completely white. Despite the cold, a red grease pencil remained tucked behind one ear. Briar went directly to him. She pressed her nose against his shoulder, checked his hands, then lowered herself along his uninjured side. Edwin rested one palm against the dog's neck. "You found somebody sensible," he said to her. Grant set down his pack. "She found me. Then I withdraw the sensible part." Lena crouched beside Edwin. "I'm Lena Broom, Mountain Rescue. Tell me what happened." "Stair had ice under the powder. I made an argument with Gravity. Gravity had better evidence." "Did you hit your head?" "No." "Lose consciousness?" "No." "Numbness below the knee?" "Only from sitting on a floor designed by people who disliked comfort." Lena began her examination without reacting to the humor. Grant looked around the room. The analog console was powered, but several indicator lights were dark. A handheld radio lay near the door with its casing cracked. The desk microphone had been removed from its mount and opened, wires exposed. "You sent the Morse signal manually," Grant said. Edwin pointed to a small brass key mounted beside the transmitter. Microphone took a surge. Handheld broke on the stairs. Phone and locator are having a quiet vacation in the sled. "Why didn't you crawl back to them?" "I tried. The outside stairs disagreed with the plan." Lena looked up. "Good decision not to continue." Edwin gave Grant a faint smile. "She understands me already." Grant ignored that. "Briar was here overnight?" "Most of it." Edwin's hand remained in the dog's coat. "She went down sometime before daylight. I assumed she was checking on the pup." "She reached Cedar when I did." "Did you bring him down?" "Holly has him at Winter Lantern, stable." Edwin closed his eyes briefly. The relief on his face was small, almost private. "Micah," he said, "Claudia found the name in your ledger." "Good name." Briar's ears shifted at the sound, though she did not rise. Grant knelt beside the console. "You climbed back up here knowing the weather was changing." "I came on an authorized inspection." "That isn't what I asked." Edwin's humor faded. "The analog transfer relay was failing. North Pass was due for maintenance work today." "The county network was active yesterday." "Active is not the same as complete." Grant turned toward him. Edwin gestured weakly toward a map pinned to the wall. Several northern valleys had been circled in red pencil. "Digital coverage drops inside those cuts when the microwave chain loses a node. I filed the reports." "They were reviewed." "They were acknowledged." The distinction hung in the cold room. Claudia's voice broke through Grant's radio. "Summit team, Winter Lantern?" Grant answered. "We have Edwin. Alert, injured knee, mild cold exposure. Lena is assessing." "Copy. Grant, update on the network." "Go ahead." "West Needle microwave dish is iced over. Bearcut repeater lost backup power. Digital contact with the North maintenance crew is still unavailable." Edwin looked at Grant. Claudia continued. "Dispatch confirms their truck left the depot 52 minutes ago." Grant looked at the red circles on the map. "They're heading into North Pass?" "Yes." "Can road control stop them?" "Not after they enter the cut. No line of sight." Edwin shifted against the cabinet and caught his breath. "The analog VHF transmitter can reach their truck." Grant faced the damaged console. "Not in its current condition." "That," Edwin said, "is why I needed someone who knows how to repair it." Lena secured the support around Edwin's knee. "You sent the distress call to bring help for yourself." Edwin shook his head. "I sent it because I couldn't reach the antenna feed, and those men were about to drive into a place where the new system goes quiet." Grant looked at the old transmitter he had planned to remove that morning. Edwin had not risked the climb to preserve a relic. He had returned because in one narrow valley, the machine still had work only it could do. Outside, the first gray edge of the storm crossed the western peaks. Inside Summit Echo, Edwin rested one hand on Briar's neck and looked toward Grant. "You can take me down," he said. "But if we leave before that transmitter speaks, somebody else may be waiting for a signal that never comes." Grant turned toward the open panel. The question was no longer whether Edwin could be rescued. It was whether the station could warn the people still moving beneath the storm. The fuel gauge on Summit Echo's generator had stopped being useful years ago. Its needle trembled somewhere between 1/4 and empty, reacting more to vibration than volume. Edwin had learned to judge the tank by sound, smell, and a marked wooden measuring stick kept behind the maintenance cabinet. Grant found the stick, wiped the dust from it, and lowered it through the filler opening. 12 liters, he said. Edwin sat against the equipment cabinet while Lena secured a padded support around his right knee. The older man had been helped into dry layers from the rescue pack, and 2 chemical warming pads rested beneath the blanket around his torso. 12 and a little optimism, Edwin replied. Grant returned the cap to the tank. The wind had strengthened outside, worrying the tower with a low metallic hum. Every few seconds, loose ice struck the outer wall like handfuls of gravel. Inside, the station lights glowed weakly, brightening and fading in time with the generator. Lena checked Edwin's pulse once more. "Cold exposure is still mild," she said. "He's alert, circulation is stable, and I can keep him warm without continuous heat for a while." "For how long?" Grant asked. "Long enough to make a plan, not long enough to argue badly." Edwin lifted one eyebrow beneath his crooked wool cap. "That excludes most county meetings." Lena ignored him and looked at Grant. "You said the transmitter can reach the maintenance truck." "If we restore full output." "And full output means?" "The analog transmitter draws more power than anything else in this room. The heater can't run with it while the switching unit is in this condition." Grant had removed the front panel from the transfer cabinet. Inside, blackened insulation surrounded one of the contactors. A previous voltage surge had damaged the mechanism responsible for routing power among the transmitter, the heater, the exterior lights, and the charging system. The generator still worked. The station still had electricity. It simply could not decide where that electricity should go without risking another failure. Grant crouched before the open cabinet. His olive utility jacket had been folded beside the console, leaving him in the dark green camouflage shirt he wore beneath it. The sleeves were rolled to his forearms. His waxed notebook lay open on the floor beside a row of tools. "We send everything to the transmitter," he said. "Get the warning out. Keep broadcasting until they answer." Edwin's expression sharpened. "And when we start down without charged radios or exterior lights?" "We have portable batteries. 2 are already below half. We conserve them." "And the generator?" Grant looked toward the fuel tank. "We use what it takes." Edwin rested his head against the cabinet. "That machine at full load will burn through our margin quickly. If the weather closes the route and we have to remain here, you'll wish you had kept something for heat." "The maintenance crew is moving toward North Pass now." "I know where they're going." "Then you know why the transmitter comes first." "I know why it matters. That doesn't make every other need disappear." Grant stood. Edwin's face was pale beneath his silver mustache, but his eyes remained clear. "We can send a timed warning," Edwin continued. 10 minutes at full output. Claudia records and relays it from below. Then we switch to heat and charge." "The contactor won't hold repeated changes." "It will if we bypass the damaged automatic relay." Grant looked into the open cabinet. That bypass was removed from later service diagrams. It was removed from the diagrams because the county did not want seasonal crews improvising inside live equipment. "And you kept it?" "I kept the instructions." "Where?" Edwin pointed toward the maintenance ledger. Grant found a folded schematic tucked inside the rear cover. The paper had softened along the creases from years of use. Red pencil lines marked an alternate routing path through the lower terminal block. "You modified this system without updating the official records," Grant said. "I documented it." "In your personal ledger." The official digital archive rejected scanned pencil notes. "That is not documentation. That is hiding information where only you can find it." Edwin's mouth tightened. "And replacing a functioning backup before its replacement has proven itself in every valley is not modernization. It is confidence wearing a clean shirt." The room went still. Briar rose from Edwin's side. Grant had not shouted, but his voice had hardened enough to change the dog's posture. Her ears shifted backward. She stepped closer to Edwin and turned her body partly across the space between them. Her eyes followed Grant's hands, not his face, his hands. Grant saw himself through her attention, standing over an injured man, shoulders squared, voice pressing into a room already too small. Briar did not know what a transfer relay was. She could not understand the disagreement or decide who was correct. She knew tension. She knew when one body occupied too much space around another. Grant looked down at the tool in his hand. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. The change in height was slight, but Briar's shoulders eased. Grant placed the screwdriver on the floor. "Show me the bypass again," he said. Edwin studied him for a moment. Then he leaned forward and tapped the schematic. "Lower terminal block. The copper bridge is stored behind the spare fuse tray. We route the generator through the manual selector. Transmitter first, heater second, charging bank last. No simultaneous load. Not unless you want the generator to complain in several languages." Grant removed the fuse tray and found the copper bridge wrapped in wax paper. Lena shifted beside Edwin, adjusting the blanket around his legs. "We agree on the sequence before either of you touches another wire," she said. Grant opened his notebook. Lena dictated the medical limits. Edwin provided the approximate fuel use. Grant calculated the electrical loads and wrote down a cycle. 10 minutes of transmission, 12 minutes of heat, 6 minutes of battery charging, exterior lights off until departure. Repeat only if no confirmation arrived. It was not the plan Grant would have chosen alone. It divided attention when his instinct wanted to force all available power toward the most urgent objective. But urgency was not the only fact in the room. Edwin needed warmth. The radios needed charge. The group needed light for the first stage of descent. The maintenance crew needed a warning. Responsibility had become a table with 4 legs. Remove one, and the whole thing could fall. Grant disconnected the damaged contactor and installed the copper bridge. Edwin guided him through the older wiring sequence, sometimes pausing to remember whether a label had been changed during a repair years earlier. The work demanded patience. Grant cleaned a corroded connection. Edwin corrected the order of 2 leads. Lena read the voltage meter while keeping one hand near Edwin's wrist. Briar lay down again, though she remained close enough that her shoulder touched the blanket around Edwin. At last, Grant tightened the final terminal. "Ready for a test." Edwin pointed toward the heater. "Turn that off completely." Lena checked the warming pads beneath the blanket. "He can tolerate the interruption." Grant moved to the manual selector. The station lights dimmed as he routed power toward the transmitter. A deep vibration traveled through the floor. The analog console awakened in stages. First the meter lights, then the cooling fan, then the low, steady tone of the carrier. Grant lifted the repaired backup microphone. "Winter Lantern, Summit Echo." Radio check. Static filled the speaker. Then Claudia's voice arrived, thin but recognizable. "Summit Echo, Winter Lantern, I read you. Signal weak but clear." Grant glanced at the output meter. "Stand by for full power." He advanced the transmitter load. The generator outside changed pitch. The meter needle climbed and held. "Winter Lantern, this is Summit Echo with an emergency weather advisory for North Pass maintenance units. Severe wind and rapid snow accumulation are closing the northern route. All crews are instructed to turn back to the county depot immediately. Acknowledge on analog channel 4. Claudia repeated the warning word for word. Grant transmitted it again. Then they waited. The 10-minute window began to shrink. No answer came. The transmitter fan blew warm, metallic air across Grant's hands. Edwin watched the clock. Lena watched Edwin. At 6 minutes, Claudia called. Still no direct response. Grant tightened his grip on the microphone. Repeat the warning. He transmitted a third time. The old station sent his voice across the valleys, over snow-covered timber, and into the narrow cut where the digital network had gone silent. 8 minutes. Edwin shifted beneath the blanket. Shut it down at 10. If they haven't answered, we agreed. We can extend 2 minutes, and then another 2. Grant looked at the fuel gauge indicator on the console. The argument rose inside him before reaching his voice. He wanted certainty. Not a message sent, but a message received. Not an effort made, but a result secured. Lena spoke without looking away from Edwin. A plan only matters if it still applies when you're afraid it isn't enough. Grant looked at the clock. 9 minutes, 30 seconds. The speaker crackled. A distant voice broke through, distorted by static. Summit Echo, North Pass Unit 3. Message received. 2 vehicles turning south. Repeating, turning south. Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. Claudia responded first, confirming the return route and instructing the crew to check in again at the lower junction. Teresa's voice joined from County Dispatch. Summit Echo, emergency management confirms both maintenance vehicles have reversed course. Road control will meet them below the cut. Edwin exhaled and let his head rest against the cabinet. Grant reduced the transmitter output precisely at 10 minutes. The carrier tone faded. For a moment, Summit Echo fell silent except for the wind. Then Grant switched the generator to the heating circuit. Warm air began moving through the vents. The change was gradual. No dramatic wave of heat filled the room. The station simply became less hostile, 1 degree at a time. Lena checked Edwin's fingers and adjusted the warming pads. Better. Edwin's eyes remained closed. Tell Teresa her expensive new network still needs friends. Grant almost smiled. I'll phrase it differently. You always do. During the charging cycle, Grant prepared the descent equipment. He secured fresh batteries in both handheld radios, tested the exterior locator lamp, and packed the maintenance schematic inside a waterproof sleeve. The weather outside had deteriorated. Snow now moved horizontally across the platform, erasing the tracks they had made on arrival. Briar stood when Grant opened the equipment room door. Cold air entered around his boots. We're leaving, he said. Lena and Grant transferred Edwin onto the rescue sled. Briar watched every movement but did not interfere. Once Edwin was secured, the dog inspected his hands, the edge of the blanket, and the sled straps. Then she returned to the open doorway. Grant stepped outside. Briar did not follow. She looked around the room, then toward the road descending from Summit Echo. Her body remained tense, weight held back over her hind legs. Edwin lifted his head from the sled. She hasn't seen the pup since morning. Grant remembered the towel Holly had pressed into his pack before they left Winter Lantern. It may help her recognize where we're going, Holly had said. Not understand it, just recognize something familiar. Grant retrieved the towel. It carried the faint sense of warm fabric, veterinary soap, Grant's gloves, and mica. He placed it near Briar. The dog approached slowly and lowered her nose. She breathed in once, then again, longer. Grant keyed the radio. Claudia, can Holly bring Micah near the set? A pause followed, then Holly answered. Give me a moment. Static filled the room. A soft, puppy sound came through the speaker, small, distorted, and uncertain. Briar's head lifted. The sound came again. The dog looked first at the radio, then at the towel, then at Grant. He did not reach for her. He did not attach a lead or block the doorway. Grant carried the towel outside and placed it on the front of the rescue sled, away from Edwin's face, but close enough for Briar to smell. Then he stepped aside. For several seconds, Briar remained inside Summit Echo. The generator continued its low cycle behind her. Warm air moved through the doorway into the storm. The station had sheltered Edwin, protected Micah, and carried the warning that turned two vehicles away from danger. Briar looked back into the equipment room once. Then she crossed the threshold. She moved directly to the sled, inspected the towel and Edwin, and took her place beside Lena. Grant closed the door without locking it. They had saved enough power to send a warning, enough heat to steady Edwin, enough charge to guide them down, and enough trust to leave the last decision to Briar. The storm erased Summit Echo almost as soon as they left it. Grant looked back once from the first bend and saw only a gray outline where the station had stood. Then the wind shifted, pushing a sheet of snow across the ridge, and the building disappeared entirely. Edwin lay secured to the rescue sled with his injured legs supported inside a padded brace. A thermal blanket covered him from boots to shoulders, its silver lining hidden beneath a heavier wool layer to keep the wind from catching it. Lena checked each strap before they moved. "Too tight across the chest?" she asked. Edwin tested his breathing. "Only when I attempt opera." "Then we're safe." Grant took the front harness. The wide pulling straps crossed his parka and settled over his shoulders. He leaned forward until the sled runners broke free from the fresh snow. Briar moved beside Edwin at first. She inspected the edge of the blanket, smelled his exposed hand, then trotted ahead to where Lena was testing the descent with a pole. After 20 yards, the dog returned and repeated the same inspection. Grant noticed the pattern but said nothing. The first section of the route followed the track they had used on the way up. Snow had already softened its edges. Their own footprints were becoming shallow impressions beneath new powder, as though the mountain had begun correcting the record of their arrival. Lena traveled ahead, stopping at every exposed turn to examine the wind. Grant kept the sled moving at a controlled pace. Going downhill required less force than climbing, but more restraint. If the sled gained speed, Edwin's weight could push Grant off balance or pull him into a turn before he was ready. The wind grew stronger below the tower. It entered through gaps in the trees and struck the road in uneven bursts. Loose snow streamed along the ground like pale smoke, collecting wherever the terrain flattened or bent away from the prevailing direction. Grant watched Lena's back. Her movements had become slower, more deliberate. She no longer relied only on the road's visible surface. At intervals, she stepped off the packed track and tested the snow beside it, searching for changes beneath the new accumulation. Briar stayed close enough to remain visible. At one narrow section, she stopped on the edge of the road and looked toward Edwin. "You still with us?" Grant called. Edwin opened one eye. "I was considering a quieter rescue team." "You invited this one." "I sent 3 short signals, nothing in Morse for argumentative." Lena glanced over her shoulder. "Save your energy." "I have been saving it for 68 years," they continued. The humor helped Edwin remain present, but Grant could hear the growing effort behind each sentence. The cold had not returned strongly, yet pain and exhaustion were beginning to pull at the older man. Grant increased his pace. "Slow down," Lena said. "The grade is clear." "For now." "We need to reach the trees before the next wind shift." "We need to reach them without overheating you." Grant felt sweat beginning beneath his base layer. The wind chilled it almost immediately around his collar. "I'm fine." Lena did not answer. Grant disliked the silence more than an argument. The road emerged from the shelter of the upper forest and entered a wide open shoulder of the mountain. On the way up, the section had been firm and visible. Now snow moved continuously across it, smoothing the road into the surrounding slope. Briar reached the edge of the open ground and stopped. Grant expected her to continue along the familiar track. Instead, the dog turned left. She walked toward a low line of pines standing below the road, then looked back. Lena raised one arm. "Stop here." Grant planted his boots and held the sled steady. Briar moved a few yards farther toward the trees, but did not disappear among them. "The main road crosses that open shoulder," Grant said. "I can see it." It's the fastest descent to Cedar. That doesn't make it the safest. Lena removed her pack and studied the surface through a compact scope. Snow had gathered in long, raised forms across the slope. The shapes looked soft from a distance, but Grant knew they represented weight newly placed where there had been little that morning. He checked the wind meter. Still below our turnaround limit. That limit was for climbing towards summit, not crossing a loaded slope with a patient on a sled. Grant looked toward Briar. The dog had entered the first row of trees. Her dark back appeared between the trunks before she returned to the edge. She knows another route. She remembers somewhere she has walked, Lena corrected. Those are not the same thing. Edwin shifted beneath the blanket. There used to be a battery service path under those pines. Grant turned toward him. It isn't on the current map. It hasn't been maintained in years. Where does it come out? Below the old east sensor line, maybe half a mile above Cedar? Maybe? Edwin gave him a tired look. The mountain did not ask my permission before changing. Lena moved toward the trees alone. Grant waited with the sled while she examined the entrance to the old path. Briar followed several steps behind her, nose lowered to the snow. The minutes lengthened. Grant looked across the main road. The slope appeared passable, difficult perhaps, but not impossible. Cedar Relay lay downhill beyond it, and the reserve team was waiting there. The old path would cost them time. Edwin needed warmth. The storm was strengthening. Every instinct in Grant demanded that they choose the shortest line between the man on the sled and the help below. But the shortest line crossed a slope he could not properly read. Lena returned after several minutes. The path is still there, she said. Narrow, but the grade is manageable. Obstructions? Some fallen branches, no major blockage in the first 100 yards. And the snow? Less wind loading beneath the trees, lower angle, longer route, but safer than the shoulder. Grant studied the open slope once more. Can the sled fit? Barely. We'll need to guide it by hand through the tight sections. He turned to Edwin. You used this path? 20 years ago, carried batteries up it before the road was widened. Briar may have found it while moving between the stations, Lena said, but we use it because the terrain supports the choice, not because she chose it. Grant nodded. Old service path. They turned toward the pines. The difference was immediate. The trees broke the force of the wind, reducing it from a steady pressure to scattered movements through the branches. Snow still fell, but it came down more vertically, collecting in soft pockets rather than sweeping across the ground. The path was little more than a shallow corridor between trunks. Grant removed the full pulling harness and replaced it with 2 shorter straps, allowing him to control the front of the sled with his hands. Lena guided the rear around roots, stones, and young trees growing where the trail had once been wider. Briar moved between them. At every stop, she returned to Edwin. Sometimes she smelled his face. Sometimes she pressed her nose against the hand resting outside the blanket. During one pause, Edwin managed to move his fingers through the fur beneath her jaw. "You've appointed yourself supervisor," he murmured. Briar remained beside him until Grant lifted the straps again. The route descended gradually for nearly an hour. Grant's shoulders began to ache, not sharply, but with the dull, deep fatigue of muscles forced to hold tension without release. His breathing remained controlled, though each turn required more concentration than the one before it. He did not mention the discomfort. At a narrow bend, the old path disappeared beneath the trunk of a fallen pine. The tree had come down recently. Snow still clung to its upper branches, and the exposed wood at the base was pale beneath the broken roots. Its trunk lay across the trail at waist height, with dense limbs extending downhill. Lena set down her pack. "We can clear the lower branches and pass the sled beneath the trunk." "How long?" Grant asked. 20 minutes if nothing shifts." "We don't have 20. "We have more than we would after an uncontrolled crossing." Grant studied the terrain around the tree. Uphill, the slope rose steeply between tightly spaced trunks. Downhill, the ground dropped into a shallow drainage filled with brush. We lift the front over and pivot the sled around the root ball. With Edwin on it, it keeps us moving. It also puts the sled sideways on the incline. I can hold it. Lena looked at the sweat frozen along the edge of his scarf. You're already tiring. I said I can hold it. And I heard you. Edwin shifted his head toward them. Should I pretend not to be present for this discussion? Grant crouched beside the sled. We don't waste time transferring him. Lena clears the branches. I take the front around the trunk. No, Lena said. Grant stood again. Edwin is my responsibility. The sentence came out more sharply than he intended. Lena's expression did not change. He is our responsibility. I'm the communications specialist who brought us into this. I am the approach lead who agreed to bring you out. I can manage the weight. For how long? As long as necessary. Lena stepped closer, her voice low enough that Edwin did not need to become an audience. Responsibility does not mean holding the entire load until you become the next person who has to be carried. Grant said nothing. Snow slipped from a branch overhead and struck the ground beside them. Lena continued. You keep acting as if accepting help changes the value of what you already did. That isn't what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing. Grant looked away. Briar had settled near Edwin's shoulder, her body positioned on the windward side of the sled. She was not trying to pull it. She was not leading or commanding. She was simply filling one useful place while trusting the others to fill theirs. Grant looked at the straps in his hands. For most of his life, usefulness had meant being the person who stayed upright when everyone else faltered. He had worn that belief so long it no longer felt like pride. It felt like a rule of physics. If a system failed, he repaired it. If someone could not carry the weight, he took more. If a mission went wrong, he searched for the moment when he should have acted sooner. Retirement frightened him because it threatened to remove the burden before he had decided who he would be without it. Grant slowly handed one front strap to Lena. You take the right side. Lena accepted it without celebration. We clear the lowest branches first, then we move him together. Grant removed a folding saw from the rescue kit. Lena stabilized the trunk while he cut only the limbs blocking the path. They worked in short shifts to avoid exhausting either person. Edwin remained still, conserving warmth and energy. When the opening was wide enough, Grant and Lena positioned themselves on opposite sides of the sled. They lifted the front together, moved it beneath the trunk, and guided the rear over the uneven ground. If a mission went wrong, he searched for the moment when he should have acted sooner. Retirement frightened him because it threatened to remove the burden before he had decided who he would be without it. Grant slowly handed one front strap to Lena. You take the right side. Lena accepted it without celebration. We clear the lowest branches first, then we move him together. Grant removed a folding saw from the rescue kit. Lena stabilized the trunk while he cut only the limbs blocking the path. They worked in short shifts to avoid exhausting either person. Edwin remained still, conserving warmth and energy. When the opening was wide enough, Grant and Lena positioned themselves on opposite sides of the sled. They lifted the front together, moved it beneath the trunk, and guided the rear over the uneven ground one careful foot at a time. The process took 17 minutes. No one slipped, no strap failed. When the sled rested safely on the other side, Grant leaned against a tree and allowed himself 3 full breaths before pretending he did not need them. Lena handed him a flask. Drink. He did. They resumed the descent with Lena taking the front harness. Grant walked beside the sled, one hand steadying Edwin's shoulder whenever the path tilted. The change felt wrong at first. He kept anticipating the pull that no longer crossed his own back. After several minutes, the absence of weight stopped feeling like failure. It became room to notice other things. Edwin's breathing had remained even. Briar's right rear paw was collecting ice between the pads. Lena's pace was controlled but slower than she would admit. Grant called a brief halt and cleared the ice from Briar's paw without trying to hold her. The dog watched his hands, then allowed him to finish. "You're improving," Edwin said. "At what?" "Not making every useful thing look unpleasant." Grant tightened his glove. "Rest." Near dusk, a distant engine sounded below the trees. Lena stopped and answered the scheduled radio call. "Cedar Reserve, descent team. We are on the East Battery Path, approximately 600 yards above the relay." The reply came quickly. "Copy. We're moving up to meet you." Two headlamps appeared between the lower trunks several minutes later. The reserve rescuers brought a wider-powered sled designed for the maintained road beneath Cedar Relay. Together, the teams transferred Edwin without rushing. Lena briefed them on the knee support, warming schedule, and remaining travel time. For the first time since leaving Summit Echo, Grant was no longer connected to Edwin by a strap, handle, or piece of equipment. He stood beside the old rescue sled with empty hands. The powered sled moved ahead under the control of the reserve team. Lena walked beside it. Briar followed close to Edwin, occasionally touching her nose to the edge of his blanket. Grant fell several steps behind. No one needed him to pull. The realization should have left him hollow. Instead, he heard the forest, wind high above the branches, snow settling from needles, the distant engine turning steadily toward Cedar Relay. He adjusted his scarf and continued walking. When they emerged from the pines, Cedar's small exterior lamp glowed through the storm. Beyond it, farther down the valley, winter lanterns shone as a cluster of warm yellow windows. Briar saw those lights and quickened her pace. Then she stopped. She turned back until Grant came into view, looked toward Lena and the sled, and waited until the entire group had cleared the tree line. Only then did she move downhill again. She would not choose between reaching Micah and remaining with Edwin, not while both could still be kept within the same journey. Grant followed the others toward the valley. For the first time that day, he was not carrying the heaviest part. The rescue continued anyway. Winter Lantern's yard had been cleared twice that afternoon, but the storm had already begun filling it again. The powered rescue sled crossed the final stretch beneath a wash of yellow light from the lodge windows. Snow gathered along Edwin's blanket and melted wherever it touched the warmer fabric beneath. Lena walked beside him with one hand on the sled rail, while Grant followed several steps behind, carrying the equipment pack he had refused to surrender until they reached the porch. Briar stayed closest to Edwin. She moved beside the sled through the open gate, then paused when the county medical crew came forward with a wheeled stretcher. Her body tightened at the sudden movement of unfamiliar people, but she did not retreat. She circled once, smelled Edwin's exposed hand, and remained near his shoulder while Lena gave the medics a concise report. Right knee immobilized, mild cold exposure, improved after active warming, alert throughout. No loss of consciousness. Edwin raised two fingers from beneath the blanket. Alert enough to object to the phrase cold exposure. It makes me sound like a neglected sandwich. One of the medics smiled but continued working. Grant might have told Edwin to save his breath earlier in the day. Instead, he lifted the front of the sled only when asked and let the medical crew manage the transfer. The doors of Winter Lantern opened. Warm air carried the scent of wood smoke, coffee, and damp wool into the yard. Briar stopped. The reaction was immediate but quiet. Her shoulders lowered. Her front paws spread slightly against the snow. One ear turned toward the open doorway while the other followed the metallic scrape of the stretcher frame. Grant noticed the moment before anyone else did. "Give her space." The medical crew moved Edwin inside without attempting to bring Briar with them. Lena followed, closing the inner glass door after the stretcher passed, but leaving the outer storm door secured open. Briar remained in the yard. Through the window, Edwin was transferred to a low examination cot near the stone fireplace. Claudia had moved chairs aside and laid dry blankets across the surrounding floor. Her silver bob had come loose around her cheeks, and her wine-colored glasses rested on top of her head as she directed people with the calm authority of someone protecting the order of her own house. Holly waited beside the cot in her charcoal vest and sage scrubs. She checked Edwin's temperature, circulation, and knee support before allowing the medics to prepare him for transport to the clinic below town. Grant set the equipment pack under the porch roof. "Briar," he called softly. The dog looked at him but did not move. Micah answered from inside. The puppy's voice was stronger than it had been that morning. It rose from the quiet section behind the sitting room, where Holly had placed a low mesh gate between his warm bedding and the activity around Edwin. Briar's head lifted. Micah called again. The German shepherd crossed half the yard before slowing near the side entrance. It was not the main lodge door that stopped her. Claudia had guided everyone through a narrow utility room attached to the rear of the building, allowing the medical crew to enter without carrying snow through the guest area. Its outer door was metal. The hinges released a short, dry squeal when the wind shifted it. Briar dropped lower. Her back legs bent as though preparing to reverse. The black saddle along her body rose visibly with each breath. When the door moved another inch, she stepped away at once. Grant reached for the long green lead Holly had left on a porch hook. "We can keep it loose." Holly appeared behind the glass panel separating the utility room from the sitting room. "No." "She's cold." "I know." "Edwin may leave in 10 minutes. "I know that too." Grant looked toward Briar. Snow had gathered along the dog's back and around the dark tip of her tail. "If we wait until she decides the entire building is safe, she may still be standing there at midnight." Holly came outside, letting the door close gently behind her. She pulled on a pale gray knit cap but did not approach Briar. "We don't know what she's afraid of," Holly said. "It may be the metal, it may be the narrow space, it may be the sound behind her when a door moves." "She followed us out of Summit." "Because you gave her information and room." "This is different." "Yes, here you want the decision faster." Grant did not answer. The criticism was fair enough to irritate him. He looked through the utility room. The space was perhaps 12 feet long, lined with shelves of boots, tools, and folded firewood carriers. A second door at the rear opened into a covered walkway beside the kitchen. Beyond that door lay the snowy service yard. 2 exits. Holly followed his attention. "She may not be refusing shelter," she said. "She may be refusing a room she cannot read." Grant looked again. From the front threshold, Briar could see the utility room but not the rear door. A hanging canvas apron, a shelving unit, and the angle of the wall concealed the passage beyond. To her, the room ended in shadow. The realization held Grant more effectively than an order. He had been thinking about the entrance. Briar might have been thinking about the exit. Inside, Micah gave another uneven call. Briar took one step forward and stopped when the hinge shifted. Grant hung the lead back on its hook. "What can we change?" Holly pointed toward the covered walkway. "Open the rear door. Move the shelving cart 3 feet. Give her a clear line through the room." "We'll lose heat." "Not from the sitting room if Claudia keeps the interior glass partition closed." The utility room was built as an airlock. Grant went around the lodge rather than walking past Briar. At the rear walkway, he cleared snow from the second door and secured it open against the wall. Claudia helped roll the narrow shelf aside from inside. They lowered a transparent vinyl wind curtain across the opening to the warm sitting room, leaving the mesh gate around Micah fully visible beyond it. The arrangement created a straight corridor. From the front yard, Briar could now see through the utility room, across the covered rear walkway, and out to falling snow on the other side. No hidden end, no door waiting to close behind her. Edwin remained near the fireplace, wrapped in fresh blankets. The medical crew had finished preparing the transport stretcher but waited at Lena's request. Micah lay several feet away behind the low gate, his cream throat patch visible above the towel around him. Grant opened the front utility door again. This time, he secured it so the hinge could not move. Holly stood beside him. "Now everyone backs away." "No food?" No, Micah is already there. He isn't bait. He is the reason she wants to enter. Grant considered the distinction. It sounded small until he understood it was not. Using Micah to force movement would make his presence a trap. Allowing Briar to see him and choose what to do preserved the connection she had protected all day. Grant stepped away from the doorway. Claudia dimmed the utility room light, reducing glare on the metal floor. Lena moved beside Edwin. Holly remained near the interior partition, but turned her shoulders away from Briar. No one called the dog. No one tapped a leg, offered food, or praised the first sign of movement. The lodge became strangely quiet. Even the county medics seemed to understand that their stillness had become part of the work. Briar approached. She stopped just outside the threshold and stretched her neck into the room. Her nose moved through the currents of air. Wet boots, wood smoke, veterinary soap, Edwin, Grant, Micah. One front paw crossed onto the rubber mat, then the other. The metal door gave a faint settling sound in its frame. Briar withdrew so quickly that snow scattered beneath her paws. Grant's body leaned forward before he caught himself. Holly glanced at him but said nothing. Briar moved away from the door. For several seconds, Grant thought the attempt was over. Instead, the dog walked along the side of the lodge. She disappeared past the kitchen wall. Grant turned toward the rear passage. Briar emerged beyond the transparent wind curtain, standing in the snowy service yard at the opposite end of the utility room. She had gone around the building to inspect the other opening. The dog looked through the corridor toward the front yard, then toward Micah behind the interior gate. Grant felt something in his understanding shift. Briar was not panicking without direction. She was mapping the room, testing whether the opening remained an opening when seen from the other side. Holly spoke so softly that only Grant could hear. She needs the building to keep its promise. What promise? That a way out is still a way out after she steps inside. Briar approached the rear threshold. The vinyl curtain moved slightly in the wind, but the door itself remained fixed. She placed one paw onto the mat, then another. This time she continued. Her body stayed low as she moved through the utility room. She paused near the shelves and looked toward the front opening. Snow and daylight remained visible beyond it. No one moved to close either door. Briar walked forward. When she reached the transparent partition to the sitting room, Micah tried to stand. His oversized front paws slipped on the towel, and he sat down again with a soft sound of frustration. The tension in Briar's body changed. Her ears lifted. Holly opened the interior mesh gate but left the clear wind curtain hanging loosely, preserving the warmth while allowing Briar to push through. The German shepherd placed her nose against the vinyl. Micah pressed toward the other side. Briar pushed once. The curtain yielded. She stepped into the warm room. No applause followed. Grant was grateful for that. Praise would have turned the moment into something the humans believed they had achieved. Briar went directly to Micah. She examined his face, neck, and belly, then smelled the cream-colored mark beneath his throat. Micah climbed awkwardly against her chest and tried to push his head beneath her jaw. Briar stood over him until his breathing slowed. Only then did she look toward Edwin. The older man had been silent throughout the entire process. One hand rested outside the blanket, palm facing upward against the edge of the cot. Briar approached him carefully. Her nose touched his fingers. Edwin's mustache shifted with a tired smile. "I told you I'd come back down," he whispered. Briar placed her head beneath his hand. Edwin did not close his fingers around her neck or attempt to hold her there. His palms simply rested against the honey-colored fur along her cheek. After a moment, Briar stepped away from him. She turned once in the space between Edwin's cot and Micah's bedding, then lowered herself to the floor. Her body faced the utility room. From where she lay, she could see the front opening, the rear passage, and the puppy behind her shoulder. Both exits remained visible. Grant stood beside the fireplace with melted snow darkening his trousers. His shoulders ached from the descent, and the old instinct to complete the scene, to close the doors, secure the room, and declare everyone safe, rose quietly within him. He did not act on it. Safety was not always a sealed perimeter. Sometimes it was the knowledge that nothing would close without warning. The medical crew waited a few more minutes before moving Edwin. When they lifted the cot, Briar stood but did not retreat. She followed it as far as the interior doorway, then stopped beside Mika. Edwin reached down as the stretcher passed. His fingertips brushed the edge of her ear. "I'll see you when I'm less horizontal." Claudia walked with the medics toward the front entrance. Lena followed to give the final report. Grant remained in the sitting room. Briar watched Edwin leave. Her body tightened briefly when the lodge door opened, but she did not run after him. She looked back at Mika, checked the visible passage through the utility room, and lay down once more. Holly lowered herself into a chair. "She may leave later." Grant nodded. "She may come back." He nodded again. "You cannot make either one mean more than it does." Grant looked at Briar. All day the dog had traveled between responsibilities without asking anyone to name them. She had stayed with Edwin, checked Mika, and followed people only when their choices left room for hers. Grant had thought trust meant convincing another living thing that danger was gone. Briar offered a harder lesson. Danger did not have to be forgotten. Fear did not have to disappear. The door only had to remain honest. Outside, snow continued filling the yard. Cold air moved faintly through the utility passage, held back from the sitting room by the transparent curtain. Briar could see the way out. She stayed anyway. The storm ended 3 days after it began. By then, the Sawtooth valleys had been reshaped into softer versions of themselves. Road signs stood half-buried. Fence posts appeared as short dark lines above the snow. The northern passes remained closed while crews cleared drifts from the county roads and inspected the damaged microwave stations. Summit Echo was still standing. So was Cedar Relay 7. That fact did not automatically mean either station would be allowed to remain operational. 2 weeks later, Grant Holloway sat beneath fluorescent lights in a county conference room with his waxed canvas notebook closed on the table before him. The room contained no windows facing the mountains. Framed evacuation maps covered one wall, while a screen displayed transmission logs, coverage models, and cost estimates. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and reheated coffee. Teresa Quinn sat at the head of the table. In person, she appeared less severe than her voice over the emergency channel had suggested. She was 56, with a straight posture, a narrow face, and dark blonde hair streaked with silver, cut neatly along her jaw. A navy blazer rested over a pale gray shirt. Her reading glasses lay beside a black document folder, though she rarely needed them. Grant had worked with Teresa for 7 years. He had never seen her make an easy decision merely because it would be popular. "The purpose of this review," she said, "is not to reward anyone for a successful outcome or punish anyone because the original plan encountered a failure. We are here to determine what the system did, what it failed to do, and what must change." Across from Grant sat Edwin Sutter, his injured leg extended beneath the table. He had traded his weather gear for a moss-colored cardigan and a checked shirt. His silver mustache had been trimmed, though the red grease pencil remained tucked behind one ear as if he expected the meeting to require repairs. Lena Broom sat beside him with the avalanche maps. Holly Ames had brought photographs and measurements of the proposed animal shelter area. Claudia Reese occupied the final chair, with 3 radio logs stacked in front of her, and a white enamel mug that no county policy had managed to keep out of the room. Grant had expected the meeting to feel like a defense. Instead, it felt like a disassembly. Every choice from the storm was taken apart and placed on the table. Why had Edwin gone to Summit Echo alone? Why had the digital microwave link failed? Why had Cedar Relay still been capable of receiving an analog distress call after its retirement date? Why had the North maintenance crew entered the pass without confirmed contact? Why had Grant postponed the shutdown procedure? The questions were direct, but not hostile. Edwin admitted that he had underestimated the weather and should have requested a second technician. Teresa acknowledged that the county had relied too heavily on test results gathered during clear conditions. Grant explained that an active distress signal automatically suspended the shutdown order. No one violated the closure directive, he said. The emergency changed the operating condition. Teresa folded her hands. And reactivating the summit transmitter? Necessary to reach North Pass. Could the warning have been sent another way? Not within the time available. One of the independent engineers changed the screen. A map of the northern valleys appeared. Green areas showed reliable digital coverage. Yellow marked weak reception. Several deep cuts between the mountains remained red. The red areas expanded when the West Needle microwave site was removed from the simulation. Edwin leaned back. I mentioned those. Teresa looked at him. You did. The answer contained neither defensiveness nor surrender. Grant had known men who would rather protect a past decision than accept new evidence. Teresa was not one of them, but neither would she preserve an entire aging network because one storm had proved one transmitter useful. The independent engineer played the recorded warning from Summit Echo. Grant's voice filled the conference room, roughened by static. Severe wind and rapid snow accumulation are closing the northern route. All crews are instructed to turn back. The recording continued through Claudia's repetition, the long interval without an answer, and finally the distant acknowledgement from North Pass Unit 3. Message received. 2 vehicles turning south. The room became quiet. Grant had heard the recording twice before. This time, seated beneath artificial light with the storm far away, he noticed something different. His voice was not the most important part. The message mattered because Claudia had been listening, because Edwin had maintained the manual key, because Lena had allowed enough time for them to reach Summit without creating another emergency, because the truck crew had known how to monitor the analog channel. A signal did not save anyone by itself. It required a chain of people willing and prepared to pass it on. Teresa paused the recording. Edwin, are you requesting restoration of the former analog network? No. Several people looked at him. Edwin adjusted his injured leg. Most of those stations are inefficient. Some are beyond reasonable repair. Keeping every one of them because they once mattered would be expensive nostalgia. Grant watched Teresa's expression shift slightly. Edwin continued. But removing every analog option before the replacement works in the deep valleys would be expensive confidence. Teresa turned toward Grant. What are you recommending? A month earlier, Grant would have answered with a complete system design, frequencies, staffing, equipment schedules, maintenance responsibilities. He would have presented something so detailed that refusing it became harder than approving it. Instead, he opened his notebook to a single page. 3 strategic backup sites, he said, not a restored network. The screen changed to a simpler map. Cedar Relay remains as the valley access point. Summit Echo carries emergency VHF into North Pass. A third site covers the eastern service corridor. The analog equipment stays inactive during normal operation and is tested on a fixed schedule. Power? The engineer asked. Modern, low-consumption backup units, no continuous electric heating, insulated equipment cabinets, and fuel reserves monitored remotely. Staffing? County emergency staff retains authority. Claudia's volunteer radio group provides listening coverage during severe weather periods. No volunteer makes deployment decisions. Claudia nodded once. Grant pointed to the lowest station. Cedar can also serve as a winter refuge. Basic first aid supplies, blankets, water, charging ports, and a radio. Not a staffed rescue center. A place to remain safe while assistance is coordinated. Holly placed a drawing on the table. The animal area should be separated from the main equipment room, she said. Ventilated, washable, and accessible from two sides. No fixed closed kennels except temporary medical crates. Animals that enter voluntarily need to retain a visible exit. Teresa studied the drawing. This is based on Briar? It is informed by her behavior, Holly replied. But the design would also reduce stress for lost livestock, working dogs, and injured wildlife awaiting transfer. Lena added the revised service maps. She had marked forgotten access roads, safe staging zones, and slopes that required seasonal restrictions. No one proposed that Cedar Relay become a monument to the storm. The station would remain useful only if it met needs beyond one emotional story. Teresa closed the black folder. I will not approve 3 stations today. Edwin's mustache shifted. Then this meeting has preserved tradition. Teresa almost smiled. I will approve an independent coverage study and a cost estimate for 1 pilot site. The county will seek a state resilience grant. Cedar Relay can operate for 1 winter under controlled conditions. Expansion will depend on documented use, maintenance costs, and system reliability. Grant had expected relief to feel larger. Instead, it arrived as something quieter. A beginning that did not pretend to be a victory. That is enough, he said. Teresa looked directly at him. For the project? For the next decision. The animal questions took longer. Holly scanned Briar and Micah for microchips. Neither carried one. Claudia contacted the county shelter, neighboring clinics, and regional rescue groups. Photographs were posted. Lost dog reports were checked across several counties. For the legally required holding period, Winter Lantern became their registered foster location. Micah adapted quickly. Within 2 weeks, the puppy had gained enough weight to discover running, although his legs often disagreed about direction. He followed Edwin's cane through the lodge and slept beneath the radio desk whenever Claudia was working. Briar remained less predictable. Some nights she slept inside the utility room with both doors visible. Other nights she chose the covered walkway. She allowed Holly to examine her and accepted a soft chestnut leather collar, but she still stepped away whenever someone reached above her head too quickly. No one discovered where she had lived before the weather stations. The absence of an explanation stopped bothering Grant. A history did not have to be known completely before its effects were respected. After the holding period ended without a valid claim, Edwin adopted Micah. He also became Briar's primary legal guardian, with Claudia registered as backup caretaker while his knee recovered. The paperwork identified responsibility for food, medical care, licensing, and safety. It did not require Briar to behave like a dog grateful for ownership. Edwin moved into a small, accessible cabin behind Winter Lantern. Micah slept beside his chair. Briar came and went between the cabin, the covered walkway, and the trees beyond the property. She returned for meals. More importantly, she returned when no meal was waiting. Grant visited, though never on a fixed schedule. He told himself he came to review the pilot plans with Edwin, or inspect Claudia's replacement radio. Sometimes that was true. Other times, he sat on the cabin steps while Briar rested several feet away, both of them looking toward the road without requiring the silence to become anything else. Grant retired on the date already written in his personnel file. There was no extension, no emergency exception. He returned his county identification, completed the final inventory, and declined the offer to manage the Cedar pilot full-time. He did accept a limited advisory position, 2 training days each month, and availability for scheduled technical reviews. No overnight call, no automatic field deployment, no authority that prevented someone else from learning the work. The first month felt unnatural. Grant woke before dawn and reached for a schedule that no longer existed. He checked weather reports he was not responsible for. Twice he drove halfway toward the county office before remembering no one expected him there. Retirement did not feel like freedom. At first, it felt like missing a step in the dark. Then the days began developing shapes of their own. Grant repaired the back fence at his house. He learned to make breakfast without reading incident reports. He joined Lena on a recreational snowshoe route and allowed her to choose the pace without treating the outing like a test. He also began training the Cedar volunteers, not replacing them when they made mistakes, training them. By the following November, snow returned to the Sawtooth Range. Cedar Relay 7 still looked much as it had on Grant's final field day, but its purpose had changed. The old transmitter remained in place beside a modern backup power unit. New frequency charts hung above the desk. Emergency blankets filled a marked cabinet. The former storage room had been converted into a simple animal refuge with washable flooring, water bowls, and 2 doors opening in opposite directions. No ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled. Teresa preferred documentation to celebration. On the first operational morning of the pilot, Grant stood before 6 adult volunteers and demonstrated the manual selector. "You do not touch this unless digital contact fails and county emergency management authorizes analog activation," he said. A volunteer raised her hand. "What if we receive an SOS first?" "You confirm the source, notify dispatch, and preserve the channel. The emergency suspends routine operations, not professional judgment." He heard Edwin's influence in the sentence. Perhaps Lena's too. Grant finished the session before noon. Edwin arrived in Claudia's 4-wheel drive truck, walking with a cane but no longer needing a brace. Micah bounded from the rear seat wearing an olive fabric collar, his once folded left ear now nearly upright. Briar stepped down after him. Her coat had filled out over the year. Honey gold fur covered her chest and legs, while the uneven black saddle remained darker on her right side. The notch in her left ear stood clear against the snow. Grant did not call her. Briar crossed the yard, climbed the station steps, and paused before the open shelter door. Both exits were visible. She walked inside. Micah followed, immediately investigating a folded blanket as if it might contain important secrets. Briar checked him, passed through the rear door into the snow, and looked across the service yard. Then she returned and lay near the radio cabinet. The receiver produced a soft wash of static. Grant closed his notebook. A young volunteer stood beside the equipment console, waiting for the station keys. Grant had spent the morning showing him the transmitter tests, fuel records, emergency contacts, and shutdown sequence. The man held out his hand. Grant removed the keyring from the dark blue carabiner at his belt. A small brass tag hung beside the keys, engraved with a short Morse sequence. For years, the weight of that ring had meant someone could call him at any hour and expect an answer. Grant placed it in the volunteer's palm. "Your shift ends at 6, he said. "The evening operator takes over then." The volunteer nodded. "And if something happens at 5:55? "You handle what belongs to your shift. Then you brief the next person." Grant looked toward the open notebook on the desk. His first instinct was to leave it there. Instead, he tore out the pages containing personal notes and handed over the technical sections in a separate binder. The knowledge belonged to the station. The old habit of carrying everything alone did not. Edwin watched from the doorway. "Leaving before something breaks?" he asked. "That is the general idea." "Reckless." Grant put on his forest green coat. Outside, the winter light had begun to soften over the mountains. Cedar Relay's exterior lamp remained on behind him, though daylight was still strong. He descended the steps. Briar lifted her head but did not follow. Micah remained occupied with the blanket. Edwin stayed near the doorway, speaking with the new operator. The volunteers continued checking frequencies without asking Grant to supervise. The station remained active. No part of it collapsed because he walked away. Grant crossed the yard and stopped once beside his truck. Through the open front and rear doors of the refuge, he could see Briar resting near the receiver. She had a clear path outside in either direction. She stayed. Grant understood then that passing on responsibility was not the opposite of loyalty. A signal had value because someone received it, understood it, and carried it farther than the person who first sent it. The same was true of knowledge, of care, of trust. Grant entered his truck and started the engine. Behind him, Cedar Relay's radio moved softly through the empty frequencies, listened to by people he had trained and no longer needed to stand beside. The light remained on. Grant drove toward the valley before darkness arrived. For the first time, leaving did not feel like abandonment. It felt like the shift had changed. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is not hold on tighter, but leave the door open, pass the responsibility forward, and trust that what truly matters will remain. In our own lives, courage may look less like carrying everything alone and more like allowing others to help. Perhaps God's quiet grace is found in those small moments when we finally understand that letting go is not the same as giving up. What part of Grant and Briar's journey stayed with you? Please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and hope. May God give you peace, wise companions, and the strength to know when it is time to carry the weight and when it is time to pass it on.